It was just another freezing night in late November when Evan Hartley, a 34-year-old single father, wrapped his coat tighter around himself and his 5-year-old daughter, Lila. The cold wind pierced through the holes in his old jacket as they waited for the last bus home. His face was worn, tired, not just from the long hours hauling boxes at the warehouse, but from the weight of life pressing down on him since his wife passed 2 years earlier. Evan had learned to live with pain, to swallow hardship in silence. Raising Lila alone, while juggling 2 jobs and overdue rent, had hardened him in some ways, softened him in others. He didn't have much to give, but what he had, he gave completely, to his daughter, to strangers, to anyone who looked like they needed help. And that's exactly what he saw that night. Across the dimly lit parking lot near the bus stop, a hunched figure moved slowly under the flickering streetlight. Evan squinted through the dark and saw a woman, limping, her face swollen and bleeding. A small child clung to her side, his face buried in her coat. No one else looked. Cars drove by. People passed. But Evan couldn't. He turned to Lila, who was rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Stay right here, baby," he said gently. "Daddy needs to help someone." He jogged across the lot and approached cautiously. "Ma'am," he said. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" The woman flinched, pulling her child behind her instinctively. But her legs gave out and she collapsed on the cold pavement. Evan caught her just in time. The little boy began to cry, terrified and confused. "Please," the woman whispered hoarsely. "He's going to come looking for us." Evan didn't hesitate. He scooped up the boy and helped the woman to her feet. "Come with me," he said. "You're safe now." He took them back to his tiny apartment on the second floor of an aging building. It was cramped and drafty, with peeling wallpaper and a single bedroom he and Lila shared, but it was warm, and it was safe. He gave the woman his bed, covered her bruises with an ice pack, and made the boy a sandwich. Lila offered the boy her favorite stuffed bunny, sensing even in her young heart that he needed it more. Over the next 2 days, the woman, who introduced herself as Grace, opened up slowly. Her partner had been abusive for years. She had finally grabbed her son and run, barefoot and desperate. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, hadn't slept, hadn't known where to go. Evan listened with quiet compassion, nodding, not pushing her to say more than she could. Evan knew fear. He knew desperation. He had once slept in his car with Lila when they'd had nowhere else to go. And now, even though he barely had enough, he made room for Grace and her son, Tyler. He gave what he could: food, shelter, safety. On the 3rd morning, there was a knock at the door. 2 police officers stood outside, their faces serious. Evan's heart dropped. "Are you Evan Hartley?" one officer asked. "Yes," he said slowly. "Is something wrong?" "We've been looking for Grace," the officer said. "And her son. We received a missing person report." Evan stepped aside, alarmed but uncertain. Grace stood in the kitchen doorway, frozen. The officers looked at her gently. "Ma'am, you and your son are safe. We know everything now." Evan watched, confused, as the officers sat down and explained that Grace's partner, Martin Cale, was under investigation for domestic assault, child endangerment, and drug trafficking. He was a known felon, and after a neighbor had seen Grace fleeing, the police had opened a full-scale search. They had feared the worst. "Your actions, sir," one officer turned to Evan, "probably saved both of their lives." Evan blinked, overwhelmed. I just did what anyone would do." "No," the officer said. "Most people walk past. You didn't." But that wasn't the only shock. Later that week, the police returned, not with questions, but with news. During their investigation, they discovered that Martin Cale had used several fake identities, and one of them led to a warehouse Evan used to work at 2 years ago, before he got laid off without explanation. Turns out, Martin had been laundering money through the company, and Evan had unknowingly been working right in the middle of it. "You were fired when they thought you knew too much," the detective explained. "They buried your employment record to protect themselves. That's why you couldn't get a reference. We've opened a federal investigation. We're going to clear your name." Tears welled in Evan's eyes. He had blamed himself for years, for not being enough, for not earning enough, for losing everything. And now, the truth was finally coming out. Over the next several weeks, things began to change. Grace and Tyler moved into a women's shelter where she got counseling and support. Evan helped her apply for a job and offered to babysit Tyler whenever she needed. The community, inspired by the news story that went viral after a local journalist picked it up, raised donations to help Evan and Lila find a better home. And then, in a quiet moment, sitting on a park bench watching Lila and Tyler play, Grace turned to Evan and said, "You didn't just save me. You reminded me what kindness looks like. You gave me hope again." Evan looked at her, humbled. "You and we're both survivors. We just need a little light now and then." By the end of that year, Evan had a full-time job again, his record cleared, and a stable home for Lila. Grace had found steady work and was thriving in therapy. Their children had become best friends, and so had they. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was something deeper. A bond born in shared pain, in quiet resilience, and in the power of simple human compassion. In a world that so often turns a blind eye, one struggling dad chose to act. And in doing so, he changed 3 lives, and his own, forever. Sometimes, the most powerful heroes are just people who decide not to look away. Moral of the story: you don't have to have much to make a difference, just the courage to care. Compassion costs nothing but can save everything.